Hello, everyone. Hello, I think I'm live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Music Masterclass for today, January 28th, 2021. It's good to see people here. And let me make sure as I do my little tech check. And I've got my chat here, see if people can hear me and everything going okay for everyone. I see some check-ins from various places around the world, which is always great. And again, I'm just someone to let me know that you all are seeing me and hearing me, and then I can just sort of continue. So I have to say, and this is actually I'm going to work this in because I like to work in relevant things. So make sure that I'm live. Yes, I'm live. Okay, good, good. All right. So some days things go smoothly, and some days things don't go smoothly. And this is one of those days. I don't know that we're going to see any technical glitches here, but it's one of these days where I was supposed to be up early to teach a class earlier, and through reasons that are partially technical and partially me related, alarm didn't go off this morning, and everything went to heck from there. And then yeah, I can say hell. And then also miscellaneous things having to do with MuseScore, the 3.6.1 release, and I've just been all sort of discombobulated all morning. And I am mentioning this because right now it's going to take a little extra. I'm staying on top of things, and things are okay, but bringing my brain to where it needs to be to think about music with and get out of the world of all these other distractions and things I've had. This is its own little thing, and I don't know that I have a great solution to this. I will say that I am very easily distracted by a lot of things, but once I get into something, then the other stuff goes away. But making it past that hump can be hard. So, one of the things that I think I want to do is I'm just going to flip right over to a piece of music. So we can just listen to a piece of music and have that be the thing that sort of puts me in the space that I need to be in personally, and then we'll go from there. So what I'm going to do is go to our music masterclass group. And okay, so while I'm doing this, I'll give the standard commercial. If you're watching this, but you're not already enrolled in the course, the advantage of doing that is you get emails from me, which because of various things didn't go out yesterday. That's all part of it. Um, but you get updates about what's happening, and so I definitely want you to, if possible, to do the bit of enrolling, uh, so you get notifications and so forth. Um, oh, and it's free. It's just a way of being able to stay in touch. So yes, I do have a second cup of coffee. So there you go. Um, yeah, that helps a lot. Okay, so we're going to listen to some music that has been submitted here. And I see that, people, there was some discussion from last week, and I've addressed some of the things that were pointed out in there. But I'm just going to go to the sheet music section here and take a look at some stuff that's been submitted. And I played through a couple of these, listened to a couple things, and uh, I haven't actually like really uh, thought about exactly what we might be talking about today. So I'm going to pick something, and I want to pick something from someone that I haven't talked to, so some new people. And I remember Vasily having chimed in with something at some point, and I'm really kind of curious to hear some of this music. So some of this music appears like maybe it was written fairly recently, or at least uploaded recently. So I'm just going to pick one of these pieces. This piece looks quite interesting, and we're gonna hear this piece here. Oh, I see. It's not an original. It's by this person, A.K. Leodolf. So I don't know if this piece here is an original or not. So let's try this one. Just because I want to be able to talk about people's original music. So let's hear this one here. Let me switch back to the chat, make sure everything's fine. Okay, good. So let's hear the music. Nice. Oh, thank you, Vasily. Boy, that is exactly what I needed. Absolutely what I needed today. So, oh, that is just lovely. And I'm so glad that I stumbled on picking this piece to talk about today, because there's a lot to unpack about it musically, but also a little bit about the context of it. And it ties into some things that we've been talking about, and it gives me an opportunity to show you a couple things that you might find interesting and useful, and into some other areas of conversation. And then we'll go from there. So, let's talk about what is actually happening. The comment. So first of all, I didn't read the description here. I saw it said Prelude in C minor, and okay, Prelude is a it's a fairly generic term for short piece of music. It doesn't really necessarily mean what it means today in most culture. We think of a prelude, pre, pre. It's something that comes before something, right? It's the introduction to some other thing. A prelude in music, the way that term has been used historically, doesn't necessarily mean that. It doesn't mean there's anything else to follow. Pieces can be called preludes just because they're short little pieces that feel like whatever we imagine a prelude might feel like. It's a very subjective thing. So, uh, this piece, when it says Prelude in C minor, okay, preludes can be in any key, and it is pretty typical in any piece of classical music. If you're going to call it this, Sonata number 1 in G or whatever, you say the key. So nothing about the title Prelude in C minor was telling me to expect anything in particular, except as soon as it started, and I'm looking at the notes right there, I'm like, oh, well, that's Bach, right? I mean, lots of people write preludes. Bach wrote preludes, Chopin wrote preludes. Lots of people write pieces that they call preludes, and it could mean anything. But this piece is very obviously, if you're familiar with the Bach Well-Tempered Clavier, it's very, very patterned after the Prelude in C minor there. So Well-Tempered Clavier, let me a little background, a little history lesson for people who aren't familiar with it. I'll tell you sort of my version of what I know about it, and a real historian could correct me on details. But prior to Bach's time, the way keyboard instruments were tuned, if you know anything about how the circle of fifths works in the overtone series and how tuning works, a perfect fifth is supposed to be tuned to a particular frequency ratio, but if you actually tune your piano so that the perfect fifth is in that exact 3 to 2 frequency ratio, you end up with a piano in which B sharp and C are not the same note. Like, you can't literally have the same key for B sharp and C, and that wouldn't do, right? We want a 12 key piano. So when people would tune keyboard instruments, they would come up with all sorts of ways around that and trying to fudge the tuning. And most of the ways that were invented to deal with that made it so that you really couldn't play in all keys. You would tune an instrument to sound good in the key of C or A minor, and the black keys were progressively more out of tune, and so playing in black keys just didn't sound very good. So as people were realizing that this wasn't such a great thing, they were like, well, maybe we can find ways of fudging the tuning. And a system of called well tempering, a particular way of fudging the tuning of these notes so you could get B sharp and C to be the same note, get G sharp and A flat to be the same note. It was a system that was come up with to do this that was starting to catch on in Bach's time, but not really. So Bach became kind of the ambassador for this. He kind of said, "Hey, let's do this. Let's go with this." He didn't invent it, but he popularized it by saying, "I'm going to write a prelude and a fugue in all 12 keys, all 12 major keys, all 12 minor keys, so 24 of them." And so wrote this to kind of prove that, hey, you can write music in all keys if you tune your instrument this way. Nowadays, we don't use that system. We use a system called equal temperament, in which each half step is exactly the same frequency ratio. So in modern instruments, every key literally sounds the same because the half steps are literally all the same size. It's the 12th root of 2 over 2, I think, is the ratio. But in Bach's time, it was fudged enough that you could play in all keys, but the keys would have sounded different. In other words, the key of C minor and the key of C sharp minor and the key of D minor, they actually sounded different. The actual ratios, like the how big the perfect fifth was, how big the minor third was, how big the major third was, all those frequency ratios would have differed because it wasn't equal temperament. But they all worked, but they had different characters. So during Bach's time, it really was the case that different keys had different character to them. This is not the case anymore. So I don't have a particular theme other than me needing to get myself into the space of talking about music because I've had a day of not thinking about music. So the theme is going to be what this piece leads me to talk about. Now, we know we've been talking about counterpoint some, and of course, this piece uses counterpoint, so I get to talk about that. So that's really lovely, and there's other things that I'm going to get to talk about. But another thing that I really have had on my mind lately is minor keys specifically, and what it means to be in a minor key. So it's really nice that some things that have been on my mind are going to be things that come up from this, and then we'll see how I'll spend some time talking about this piece, and then I'll jump into other pieces. So yeah, nowadays, the way a piano is tuned, every key literally sounds the same. But other instruments aren't, that's not the case, right? Wind instruments are going to have a natural overtone series to them. So a B flat trumpet is going to sound one way in the key of B flat, but in the key of B, it's going to actually sound different because the overtones are going to be tuned differently. And so different instruments have different character to them as far as how they sound in different keys. And so over the years, this has sort of turned into like these perceptions that this key sounds this way, this key sounds that way. It's not really that one key sounds different than another key, but on any given instrument, that might be true. On piano, it is literally not true, but we can still have associations from having heard other music in keys, and any little bit of perfect pitch you have within you might recognize when you hear a key piece in the key of B that somehow it triggers the memory of other pieces in the other pieces in the key of B. So even though the key of B and the key of B flat literally on a piano have exactly the same frequency ratios, where they don't on other instruments. On piano they do, yet we can still have these different perceptions of keys that come kind of from the historical context of this. And on piano, then there's the physical sensation of playing in different keys, where the white keys are versus the black keys, that make some keys basically feel different than others, and therefore some things that are natural to do in some keys are less natural in other keys. And this becomes a big deal when you're improvising. Especially when you're composing, you can maybe not think about that, but when you're improvising, your hand knows white keys. The thumb likes to be on white keys. These guys like to be on black keys, and that's just the way it is. White key, black key. All right, so that's a little bit of context. There are plugins actually to tune MuseScore. So if you go to the plugins on MuseScore.com, you will see a temperament plugin there, and I know that people use them, so they exist. All right, so Bach wrote that piece to be this whole collection, the Welltempered Clavier, to kind of show off this idea of playing in different keys. And the C minor prelude starts off very similar to this, But this piece also brings in bits of the E minor prelude, which I wouldn't have recognized myself without being told that, because I am not like, I know the Well-Tempered Clavier, but I don't know it, you know what I mean? So what I'm gonna do is, the this was a project that, was, launched a few years ago, where, a group of people entered the entire Well-Tempered Clavier into MuseScore and had it kind of professionally edited so that it would be, like, really good versions of these things. And other people have done their own version, but what I really want is the open score version, and that's this one here. Uh, Open. Okay, I think this must be the one. I'm a little not sure because this isn't exactly how I remember it looking, but in any case, the C minor prelude is right here. All right, so that's the first four bars. And the whole prelude is basically built on that kind of pattern until it isn't, right? Until you get to a passage where he's like, okay, let me do something. Right? And then it's just, well, let's just play it to the end. All right, so that's the Bach prelude there, the C minor prelude. I should skip ahead to the E minor one, except apparently this is just the C minor one here. But this is just the C version? Okay, yeah, so I'm still not sure. I downloaded this at one point, but this doesn't have them all. This just has the C one. So there must be another copy of it somewhere else. But I'm not going to worry about it. I just want to focus on the parts that I want to focus on. So ba ba da da dum ba da dum is the pattern. And if we flip over then to Vasili's version, he has a similar boom ba da 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 boom ba da. It's not the same pitches, right? But it's a C minor, it's a leap, and then a step pattern. So he's taken that pattern. This pattern was a leap down, then step, step, right? It was like a lower neighbor from E flat down to D. We call that a lower neighbor. E flat is the chord tone. It's the third of the C minor chord. And we step down to the D and then step back up to the E flat. It's like going to visit your next door neighbor or your downstairs neighbor and coming back up. And so that's what this pattern is based on, a leap and then these lower neighbor figures. And they're really pretty much all lower neighbor. He doesn't go dun dun dum. It's always bum bum bum, at least through here. But probably somewhere else in this passage he uses upper neighbors. Bum bum bum. Although I've never really thought it through before, and as I'm looking, I don't see a single upper neighbor in any of these things. I mean, you can tell the shape of these things, right? That's their lower neighbor figures because they look like this, not like that. Um, so already that's one of the changes that Vasily made here, of just having a lower neighbor and an upper neighbor figure. But he's obviously keeping to that same basic kind of feel. All right. So the really fantastic thing about this is Bach's prelude, and Bach was fine with this. Bach was totally fine with this. This very much comes across as an exercise to me. And when I say that, I mean uh what did I see? What is it? Plugins. Okay, good. I do have this on my phone. I should just look over here. Okay. So what was my point? My point is this is not the world's most melodic thing. It feels like accompaniment, right? it feels like accompaniment. It does you don't listen to this and go, "Oh, that's a singable melody." And the most famous of the preludes is the C major prelude. So you've probably all heard this one before. And the thing is, this also, it's just a series of arpeggios. It's a pattern that keeps repeating, and there's more that goes on to it, but it's not in itself the most melodic thing in the world. And Bach was okay with that. He's making some points here. But other people have taken this, and maybe some of you have heard it, are familiar with the fact that there's the Ave Maria melody that has been set to this. I sing it in that octave. Right? So that's the Ave Maria. So Ave Maria has been set to this with putting a melody to that lyric. And this, it's not the one that many people know, the more familiar Ave Maria melody, but it is Ave Maria melody. You know, it's funny because earlier I realized I had a high A singing in my ear training class this morning. Because I don't usually have a high A, but I lost it on the B is the deal. Um, yeah, okay, that's interesting to know. You mean the C major one? That makes sense. Yeah, a lot of times that this happens, and that when you mention that, it does sound kind of familiar. So anyhow, this idea that you could create something that's really a pattern. Often that's true with some preludes. They really just feel like exercises, and some of Bach's preludes feel that way. Others are more clearly melodic, but a lot of them are this sort of pattern-based thing. And then the fugues, it was a prelude and then a fugue. And of course, a fugue is a very contrapuntal thing with imitative counterpoint. But the preludes are often based on establishing a pattern and working it through. And there is a melody if you follow like that top note. Oh, I said it wasn't an A, it was just an F that I had. So bad me. F, F, E. No, I was singing it at A before because I was singing G. I don't even remember what I was singing. Never mind. Ave Maria. Yeah, that started on E. Um, it's important to me to think through these things. So I'm thinking aloud, but I want you to be doing that too. When I'm thinking that through, I wasn't thinking about where Ave Maria melody was. I was just singing it. For whatever reason, I'm singing it in that octave. Um, And I didn't know what those notes were, but now I'm having to think about it. Ah, well, C is my tonic, E, that is my note. So I would sing the note and then find the tonic and then sing the note again, and that's how I'll figure out where it is. So anyhow, that Ave Maria melody was placed on top of it. So here, Vasily has chosen to do something quite similar of taking this pattern-based thing that Bach had, not keeping that same pattern, but altering the pattern and then putting a melody on top of it. So he's taken Bach up a couple of notches here. One, taking it and varying the pattern more so that it's got upper neighbors too, but then and then also throwing these chordal things in the right hand, that E flat and the G together that weren't there in the original. And so he's changed that pattern around, added additional chordal information to it, and added a melody. And to me, I mean, that's just beautifully, just incredibly well done. That is just so beautiful. Now, if you look at the actual chords, here we have a C minor chord, boom, and here, boom. The left hand doesn't actually give me the third of the chord or the fifth. It's just really about the roots. But the right hand is filling out the chord, the third and the fifth. The next measure here is kind of, I see a C, I see the A flat, and then the melody is the F, and there's a D here. This is basically a D half diminished chord. It's D, F, A flat, C, right? So it's D or minor 7 flat 5. In the Bach, oops, wrong one. The Bach C minor prelude, that's the similar kind of thing here, except there is no D. if I'm not mistaken. Um, Here we hear the C, the A flat, and the F, and all those lower neighbors. But here it's just an F minor triad. It's the 4 chord, but it's keeping the C in the bass. It's keeping this pedal tone, we would call it. Pedal tone meaning like on an organ, literally you would play a C with your foot and just let it ring while you do all this fancy stuff on top. He's kind of imitating that idea of keeping a pedal tone, but on a piano, of course, it's not really played with a pedal, but it's played by repeating this C through all the chords. Because the next chord, C, is not even in that chord, right? This chord, if you look at the notes, you have a B, you have an F, and you have an A flat. Well, this is a diminished chord. This is basically a B diminished chord. B, D, F, A flat would be a fully diminished seventh chord. The D happens right there, right? So B, D, F, and A flat. It's a B diminished chord, the 7 chord, and then it comes back to 1, comes back to C minor. So this is the 7 chord with that C being maintained in the bass called pedal point. And so that's the same pattern that's going on here. So in Bach's version, there was no D in the second chord. It was the 4 chord. It was the F minor chord. In Wassili's version, he's putting a D on it, which makes me call it a D half diminished chord. But think about it. D, F, A flat, C. I call that a 2 chord, half diminished. But F, A flat, C, that's our 4 chord, our minor 4 chord, F, A flat, C. They're the same chord other than the D. 2 and 4 substitute for each other freely. This is an important principle to be aware of, that 2 and 4 can substitute for each other freely because the 4 chord is just the 2 chord missing its root. So the fact that Vasily changed the 4 to a 2 here, he's keeping the same basic style of the piece. And then the next measure is that same diminished chord, B, D, F, A flat, and again keeping the C pedal. Now I'm going to guess, without overthinking this too much, I'm going to guess he didn't keep the exact harmonic sequence all the way through. Okay, the C minor one is the one that the Carpenters used. Um, so I'm going to guess he doesn't keep the exact same sequence the whole way through, but I could certainly spot check that pretty easily, right? We could look and see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Measure 10 is a B flat 7 kind of chord. And now we can flip over to this version here and see if measure 10. No, it's not the same. Is it this measure though? Measure 9. So maybe I miscounted measures and it really is the same. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it's different. And in this case, it's a B flat chord with an A flat in the bass. And here he's got the B flat chord, but with a D in the bass. And then going to an E flat chord in root position here. So it's obviously related to Bach's chord progression, but he must be modifying it as he goes along. So yeah, there's just so much to love about this piece and what's happening. But the reason I'm focusing on these connections, because that's how he wrote this piece. This idea of doing what we sometimes call model composition it's a great technique, and I think I've alluded to it before, and I've definitely wanted to talk about it more. And so this gives me an excuse to do so. The idea of model composition is you take a piece as your model and you understand what makes it tick, and you try to create your own piece that uses the same techniques. You decide for yourself how similar you want it to be, how different you want it to be, which techniques you want to learn from it. This obviously was so similar in the first 2 beats that I instantly, even if you hadn't told me that this piece was called Prelude in C minor, if you had just said, hey, I got a piece to play for you, and you played it, and I didn't look at it at all, or look at the title, or know the title, or anything about it, if you had just played, I would have said, oh, that kind of reminds me of that Bach Prelude in C minor, because it does, right? It's that repeating 16th note pattern with the neighbor figures. But eventually I would have said, oh, yeah, but it's got that cool melody on top. It's its own thing. And I would have been accepting it at that level. So this is what model composition is about. You really analyze what's going on in another piece. You don't have to copy the exact chord progression. You can if you want to, because maybe the chord progression isn't what interests you. Maybe it's the textural thing, the use of this ostinato figure, I'll call it. It's a repeating figure, although in this case it keeps changing pitches to fit different chords. Sometimes when we use the ostinato pattern, we really mean a literal repetition. But in this case, it's a not a literal repetition, but it's boom, beep, 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 blah, 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 blah. It's that pattern of low note, high note, lower note, up, boom, boom, right? It's low note, leap up, and then some neighbor figures. So that's the pattern that repeats throughout as it moves through different chords. So really, just looking at it that level, I could then go through the whole piece and talk about what's happening harmonically in it, but you already have now the idea of the model. And sometimes that's good enough. Sometimes just knowing the basic starting point is all you need to understand the model. Now, I'm going to guess that this melody on top comes from the E minor prelude. And so here, because I didn't find it online, I'll show you. I've already downloaded the thing because to me it was a useful thing to have. Where did I put the thing? And I always go through that now where I don't remember where I put stuff, but somewhere I have open Welltempered Clavier. And so what I want is Prelude and Fugue number 2 is the C minor, 3 would be C sharp major, 4 would be C sharp minor, 5 would be D minor, D major, 6 would be D minor, 7, 8, 9, 10. I must need number 10 if I'm doing my math right. Boy, I hope I'm doing my math right. 10 should be E minor. Got it. So here's the E minor version. Yep. Okay, so just noticing here that the chord progression is essentially the same, right? It's a one chord, one, four, A minor, but here he's keeping that pedal tone again, keeping the E common between them. And then I would say 5 because I hear everything as a 5 chord, but technically this is a D chord, it's a D sharp diminished chord. 1. So it's the same chord progression basically. 1, 4, and then 7, and then 1. But this one, it also has a similar pattern here of these neighbor figure things. So in that respect, that piece actually is more closely related to this piece than it was to the C minor one, but it's got things in common. And here, now I get that chord, right? Dum, dum, right? That the statement of the chords and the melody sitting on top. So had I been more familiar with the E minor prelude, I would have heard that as the closer analog to what's happening here because it's really got that in common. So even recognizing how similar these two preludes are, that was part of the genius of doing this piece is seeing the things that are similar between them and sort of combining them in some way. So yeah, there's just so much really interesting stuff going on here. But then uh, in the spirit of what it means to be a prelude in this sense, I would say then it's just taking that idea and going with it. Right now, it's like, okay, I've got my idea, and now I want to develop the chord progression, do what I want with the chord progression, do what I want with the melody, and make a piece out of it. The thing that you get from Bach is summarized very well in the first four measures. Now, there's other things happening too. You remember that Bach piece? There was that one section where it slowed down, right? The one section where it does this. That doesn't happen in this version. So that was a piece that he chose not to borrow from. But the ending is something very borrowed. So let me play you the ending again. Bar 25 again. Here's the one chord. And then From here on out, so this is the one chord, C minor. Then we get again this sort of diminished feeling thing, or half diminished, or something with that A flat, right? And that the B natural here, but keeping the C in the bass. So we have this tension over that tonic pedal. This idea of a tonic pedal, keeping that one in the bass while changing chords above it, is one of Bach's favorite techniques, especially at endings of pieces. And so again here, keeping that C constant while he has this chord on top of it, that's kind of a D major chord. Um, you could possibly think of it as a diminished chord, a C diminished chord, but it's got the D, F sharp, and A pretty clearly in it, and a D in the melody. So I'm more likely to call this a D chord. And then 5. So this I'm calling 5, that 2 chord here. D wants to go to 5, right? D major likes to go to G, but he does the other typical thing that you will see in this kind of music all the time. Instead of going directly to the 5 chord, instead of going directly to G, give me the G in the bass, but put a 1 chord above it. In other words, this is a 1 chord in second inversion. So ending your piece that way, or ending any type of phrase that way, coming after 2, instead of going directly to 5, you go to 1 in second inversion and then to 5. And so you get the G in the bass, you get that scale degree 5 in the bass, but you get some notes moving on top. Some theorists say, oh no, that's not even a 1 chord in second inversion, that's just 2 notes. Those are just 2 non-chord tones. This is just a G chord with an E flat and a C in it. That's a sort of more modern theoretical way of looking at that. But let me play these last 3 measures again. So the last measure, major chord, ending on that major chord, and then again holding that pedal, and then so holding that pedal because the left hand is now outlining again this diminished chord, B, D, F, and A flat. So let me play that measure again. Major, diminished, major. So ending on a major chord and then having that pedal continue while you change chords a little bit again is very Bach-y. So if I look at the end of this prelude, I'm going to guess that we'll hear something similar. Right, so this one doesn't end with that pedal figure at all. There was no pedal point here, but it does end on the major. So it's just a C chord to a B chord to an E. The C chord is the sixth, the flatted sixth is the way I like to think of it. But in the key of E minor, C is scale degree 6. So we have that scale degree 6. Oh, and there's another thing to show here. We have a 5 chord here, the B chord, B. You expect B to go right to 1. You expect B, the 5 chord, to go to E, the 1. But instead it's going to 6. That's a deceptive cadence. In minor keys, in major keys, when 5 goes to 6, it's going to a minor chord. In minor keys, when 5 goes to 6, it's going to a major chord. That C chord is a major chord. 5, 6, that major 6 chord. E, B, C, then back to B. So we get that 5 going to 6, and then 5 going to 1. So, and the 1 is a major chord. So in this case, he is not referencing that with that whole business, that whole pedal point business there, but the C minor prelude does end that way. So at right after that Adagio section, so here in this measure, we have that the pedal point is being established. We get the C, and we have that diminished chord, and we land on an E natural over that C. So we're suggesting a C major chord. Now it's not totally just a C major chord because there's all this other stuff going on in the arpeggios. And that's typical of Bach. He draws out his endings often. That other piece wasn't so drawn out, but this one kind of is. Right? So that's a lot of drawing out of the C major sound, but then also this diminished sound, the 7 chord here, the B, D, F, A flat sound, while sounding over that C pedal. He's got that 7 diminished going to C major, and then back to some 7 diminished, back to C major, back to 7 diminished, back to C major, back to C major, some more kind of diminished or other kinds of sounds that are, like this measure here, F, A flat, C, instead of calling that, well, it does have that B diminished, that B natural there, but if you just looked at the F, A flat, C and said, oh, that's a 4 chord, I won't say you're wrong for that either. So in that case, it's not the 1 chord. It's something suspended over that 1, but then it finally lands on the 1 chord. So he's really drawing out this C major. Hey, not C major. Yeah, C major. And that's exactly what also Vasily is doing. So there you go, major, not C major, major. So he's not drawing out quite as long, but it's the same feel. The one other thing that I would point out about this piece is last week when we listened to the saxophone quartet and that sound font sounded so nice. The same is true here, right? This is like I'm actually wondering main audio source. Yeah, I wonder. I'm not like I'm not super familiar with all the capabilities on MuseScore.com as far as connecting to your own audio and all, but I'm wondering if this isn't like an actual recording being referenced from somewhere via YouTube, because I know you can do that. You can connect a score to a YouTube video and it will show the video, but you can also connect it to just the audio from that. And this really sounds nice, like a real pianist playing. So if that's coming from just a sound font, then I'm quite impressed. And definitely makes me want to just download the thing and um, there's a way by looking into the score to figure out what sound fonts were used in creating it. Um, it depends on how it was done, but anyhow, I'm going to download the thing because I really like the piece, and now I'm going to have a copy of it because I want to have it. So basic music theory, no, not theory, sorry. This is the music master class. They have the same number of words. That's about as far as my brain is working this morning. So, okay. So when I load this score now, it's possible that I will actually, no, I won't be able to see the sound font that's in it. I have to do some other stuff. So anyhow, that's a whole bunch of things in here. So why the 30-second notes at the end of 27 weren't notated as a trill? So if we're talking about, I assume we're talking about, actually, I don't know what we're talking about, which one we're talking about. 30-second in a measure 27. Right here. So my guess, you would have to ask Vasily that, and I'm guessing he's not here because, yeah, I need to be better about having a system so I can let people know when we're talking about their music. I know if the shoe was on the other foot, I'd appreciate that, and so I'm sorry that I'm not developing a system for this, but I'm definitely up for figuring out if you guys want to help me come up with that, come up with a system in which we can choose some pieces ahead of time collectively and let everyone know that. That would be great. So anyhow, uh, I will say it's possible that he wanted to really control the playback of it, control exactly to make sure these E flats line up exactly with these notes. And he wanted it to have that exact ending figure on it there. It could be that he really wanted to control that. In fact, I will be willing to bet that. If I were notating this for someone else to read, I would probably notate it as a trill and then just notate that ending figure at the end of it. But pulling that off in MuseScore takes a little work. That's one of the things that in yesterday's cafe, when I talked about problem solving, if we wanted to talk about how you do that, um, in fact, why not? Right? If I needed to do that, so here, what it really is a D with a trill, and it's basically a D half note for the first. Right, we have our D, and then I'm going to put a trill on it, and I'll notate it using the trill line. people who were watching Cafe yesterday and remember all my yellow clefs there. I did manage to. Actually, I didn't. You know what I did? I just said, you know what, this is my opportunity because things have been added to the palettes and there's been things changed around since I made my custom one. I'm like, I'm just going to redo it, and I just deleted my. I deleted my custom workspace and recreated it really fast. Luckily, I had already saved. You can save palettes in MuseScore. That's the thing to know. You can like right click it and then save palette here. So I had previously saved my layout palette and my annotations palette. Those are my two ones I had customized the most. I had saved them so that I could use them on my other computers. So I just reloaded those palettes into my new workspace. And the other customizations I had previously done was like getting rid of all this stuff I never used. Most of these clefs I never used. So I just deleted a lot of those clefs before. Now they're all back. I'll have to do that again, but that's a task for another day. So anyhow, that's little MuseScore-isms for you. So I'm going to put in a trill here. And now, if I want to notate an ending on this, what I think I'm going to do is use grace notes after. There's a lot of different ways of doing this, but if I do this and notate them as, say, 16th notes, or you can choose whether you want them to be 30 seconds, but I'll do it this way. I'll just enter 4 of them, and then E flat. So this won't sound exactly right. It almost did, though, right? It actually did. I think I didn't think the trill was going to be smart enough to take these ending grace notes into account, but I think it did. I expected to hear 2 notes. I expected to hear the original trilled E flat along with the C at the same time, but I didn't hear that at all. Now, if I slow down the tempo, is it going to play the trill slower? All right, that's too many notes, and I can't really tell. But it never It never played 2 notes at the same time. So, at the actual tempo of the piece, this is pretty convincing. And then we might as well put the final note on it, right? Yeah. So that actually is this. Dum. So yeah, MuseScore does get that playback right in this case. So yay. Because usually the playback of ornaments and things like that is an opportunity for people to complain that our defaults aren't good enough, and yeah, maybe they're not always, but they get the job done. All right, so I really enjoyed spending time on this piece, and so Firstly, I will contact you offline. Apologize for not having let you know we were doing this, but then you'll hopefully get to look at this. And I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know about your piece, right? Because you wrote the thing and you know what you did. You could probably be telling me things that I missed about this, like until I actually loaded the E minor one, I didn't realize how heavily influenced it was from that because I was aware of the connection to the C minor, but then once I listened to the E minor, I'm like, wow, it's actually closer to the E minor. And so it was really brilliant the way you brought those together. I just applaud you. I just think you did a marvelous job. All right, I'm going to go and just jump into another piece of music to talk about briefly, just to have something different to talk about. So again, in the spirit of picking different things, I'm a little curious. So like I never remember exactly whose pieces I've talked about when, because a lot of names I recognize and I've corresponded with people in different in different contexts here and there, and I know I've never attempted to pronounce this name before. Ben, I know I've talked to Ben about some different things, and I am kind of curious uh because we've been talking about counterpoint, and I kind of want to hear this, but I kind of actually want to hear something different. So if you don't mind, if Ben, if you're around, I'm actually going to skip and just listen to this chorale because that's something different, right? Oh, it's an E flat major. I was going to say, oh, it's C minor because I saw the key signature and we've just been looking at C minor, but that first chord is an E flat major chord, so it's going to sound different enough. Music's just wonderful. Sometimes I get so wrapped up dealing with the mechanics of life and the developing and bug fixing on MuseScore and working out details of teaching my course that I don't just take the time to just enjoy music and let music do what music is supposed to do for me. So thank you to both Vasily and Ben for bringing me back to earth today. So yeah, I'm going to talk about just a few things about this. We talked a lot about chorale style music kind of towards the beginning of when I was first launching this masterclass, and in the cafe episodes that kind of gave me the idea to do this whole masterclass. And so some of the techniques of writing chorale I've talked about, but I want to talk about, well, first of all, what we mean by chorale for people who don't know. It's this style of writing, usually four voices, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. That is the most typical. It doesn't have to be that, but it's four voices that are typically, when we use the word chorale, we mean literally voices, literally people singing. You could call it a chorale and have it played by oboes and bassoons if you want. That's fine. But the term chorale obviously implies something about like choral, like vocal. And so specifically, though, rhythmically, it typically means this style in which all the voices are singing together. It's the anti. So when I first started talking about counterpoint, I talked about homophony versus polyphony. This is homophony. It's not totally that. He's got lots of places where, like on the very first note, the main melody in the soprano is a half note, but two of the other voices have quarter notes from the first two voices, right? And then we have two quarter notes in the melody on beats 3 and 4. Bum, 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 bum. So the melody has the half note, bum, while the two other voices have quarter notes. And then on beat 3 and 4, the melody has bum, 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 quarter notes, but the alto, bum, holds an E flat. So that idea that there might be some places where there's little bits of one voice moving while the other don't. Yeah, good chorale writing has that going on. But the predominant motion is that of homophony, of all voices kind of moving together. If we look at this third measure, that was an interesting little glitch at the beginning of that. That's just what the website's going to be for me today. Yeah, sometimes it is that way. If I download the thing into MuseScore, then I can play with it a little better. So I think I'm going to do that. So that's what a chorale is. You're writing something in which um, the basic texture is that homophonic texture of all the instruments having essentially, or all the voices having essentially the same rhythm. All right, here we go. So there's that measure again. So that sound is the sound of a chorale. And then typically we expect chorales will be fairly simple harmonically, but that's where, depending on how far you want to go with it, you can push things. When I say simple harmonically, though, I mean that the chords are typically triad seventh chords and not a whole lot of super fancy stuff going on, but they do move fairly quickly because we're moving all voices on every beat, basically. Um, it does mean that we're changing chords a lot. We don't tend to let one chord ride. Like if we look at, in fact, let me load, now that I've got it in here, we load Vasily's piece. This is basically one chord per measure. C minor, whoa. So that's the thing. Because he's using a different sound font, it's not playing at all for me. I'll have to come in here and tell it, hey, really use the piano. I'll use the mellow piano because it was a pretty mellow sound that he had going. So we had a C minor chord for a whole measure, that D half diminished chord for a whole measure, and then the diminished chord for a whole measure, C minor for a whole measure. And that's a typical type of harmonic texture. In chorale writing, though, it's typical that we change already the chord has changed. Bum, bum, bum. It was a chord and then a new chord on beat 2. You could argue, is it really a new chord or is it just some passing tones? Because I'm looking at the actual pitches. There's a B flat, there's a D, and there's a B flat here, a D here, and an F there. Well, that's a 5 chord. Even though the melody is sustaining the G, the chord went 1 5 1 1 5 1. Right? It did that. So we had that little bit of harmonic motion in there. And then same here, the melody is only having half notes. So the melody felt like maybe there's only 2 chords, but if we really look at it, that first chord is C minor, E flat, and G, right? Or C, E flat, and G. It's a C minor chord. But then by the middle of the measure, we've lost the C. The C is no longer sounding. We are now adding, we are doubling the G. And now at that point, we really hear a C, an E flat major triad. Because now that we've lost the C in the bass, the G, G, the E flat, and the B flat add up to an E flat triad. And then of course we come to an A flat triad. A flat, and an A flat again, and then C. The E flat is actually missing from this sound. There is no fifth in that sound, but that's okay. You can omit that. And that's because there was, I guess he was feeling no place to put it. I would argue that we didn't need to double the A flat again. Okay, let me do a little surgery on this here, and then we'll see. I'm not going to say this is better, but if we look at this A flat chord and really see that there's A flat, and A flat again, and then C and C. We got 2 roots, 2 thirds. What if I revoice this just a little bit? Let me finish the measure first, then I'll come back, because I want to point out that that A flat then comes down to an F, and we have F, A flat, and C. So it's F minor by the end of the measure. So there's 4 chords in this measure. That allows this to just be a triad: F, A flat, and C. If I put an E flat into this A flat chord, that E flat is now going to be the 7th on that F minor chord. I'll have to decide if I want that or if I should let it move, but let me just do the revoicing first. I'm looking at this and I see 2 roots and then 2 thirds. And I'm not crazy about the 2 thirds in particular because we've just had the alto and soprano doubled, and doubled at the same pitch, not even doubled at the octave, but doubled at the same pitch. And now we get them doubled again. This is almost parallel octaves. It's parallel unisons. So I kind of could hear that. Kind of. I heard the fact that we heard E flat in both voices, soprano and alto, and then 2 beats later, I hear C in both voices. That's kind of parallel octaves. Yes, it was disguised nicely because one of these E flats was held over from the previous measure, and it had an intervening B flat, so it's disguised in an appropriate way. That is good if you're going to introduce parallel octaves. And parallel octaves, if you're not aware, it's a thing where it's 2 voices basically doing the same thing, which is fine if you're just doubling the entire melody. But you normally don't want to have just one little passage where 2 notes are doubled like that. It thins out the texture, so it feels like there's only 3 voices there, and one part gets sort of too prominent, and it sort of throws off the balance a little bit. But I think Ben has done a great job of disguising that, and I'm pretty sure this was intentional, that he knew exactly what he was doing here, because there's any number of things that he could have done differently. Like at the end of that first measure, he could have had that E flat go down to a D, except that would have caused parallel, because that D would have created a complete 5 chord here at the end of the first measure. We've had B flat, D, and F, but he didn't do that because that would have given him parallel octaves with the bass. So he said, okay, I'm going to just keep the E flat at the C minor, but I think I'm going to tie it over. Why? Well, because tying is cool, but I think also because he saw the parallel octaves coming and thought, well, if I tie it, that'll disguise it a little bit. And he's right, it does disguise it, as does bringing in this B flat here, which also fills out the chord nicely. So maybe it was just an accident that he tied it, because ties are it's nice to use ties on common tones. It kind of creates a different rhythmic feel of one note being sustained while other notes are moving. So maybe he wasn't thinking about the parallel octaves. Maybe this B flat, he was just thinking about the chord, but it definitely had the right effect. It disguised the parallel octaves. Anyhow, I am now going to take this A flat. I have bass and tenor both on A flat, and I'm just going to take this thing and I'm going to bring it down and give it the missing fifth. And because I wasn't happy with that doubled C coming after that doubled E flat, I'm going to give this guy the A flat. So now I've got two A flats in the bass and alto, and then soprano on the C and tenor on the E flat. I now have a full triad. Now I have to ask myself, am I okay with my alto being that low? And yeah, it's not that low. It's just lower than the alto has been anywhere else in the piece. The alto doesn't go that low anywhere else, but that's a fine note for altos to sing. Altos can sing A flats in their sleep. So so that to me was a perfectly good thing. And the tenor singing that low E flat, that's not a low E flat for a tenor. That's a good note for a tenor to sing. Yeah, I'm not a tenor, I'm a bass, but in any case, that's fine. But then as I make that change, I want to look ahead, because as I said, now that E flat is the seventh uh of the F minor chord that's now being formed on beat 4. And at this point, I'm now aware that I've created parallel octaves. I'm aware of it because I heard it. I heard A flat, A flat, B flat in the bass, and now I'm hearing A flat, B flat in the alto. So I've actually created some parallel octaves by trying to solve other parallel octaves. You can drive yourself crazy. And again, they're a little bit disguised by the fact that the bass has that F in between, but it's not disguised enough for me. I heard it. If I hear it, that's how I know it's a problem. Um, and for that matter, I created parallel fifths. Oh man, boy, did I do a bad job with that. Yeah, that's why that sounds so bad, because I have A flat to E flat as a perfect fifth, and now I have B flat to F as a perfect fifth. But it doesn't make me want to give up on the change I made to the A flat chord. It makes me want to revoice my B flat chord in a way that solves that. So I asked myself, can I be happy taking this? So this E flat, because it's the seventh of an F minor chord, the end of that second measure, if I think of that as an F minor chord, that E flat is the seventh, it should be going down. It should be resolving down to a D. And I'll ask myself, is that okay? It does give me a doubled leading tone with the melody, but maybe I'm going to be okay with that. And then I look at this B flat here and think, well, because that was the parallel octaves here between A flat, B flat, B flat. What if I just kept it on A flat and let this be a seventh chord here? It's not going to make me happy with the next beat, but I can fix that. No, I didn't like that double leading tone. Can you hear that? Yeah, that's not my favorite voicing. Nope. So in any case, I don't know if Ben had to go through all these same gyrations that I'm going through before settling on what he settled on. But these are the kinds of things you think about when you're writing in chorales. You voice things to try to avoid. You want to have the chord voicing work for you. You want to avoid parallel octaves and parallel fifths. You want to avoid voicings though that just sound bad on their own, like that one does. Now, it could just be a MuseScore playback artifact, but I did know I was asking for trouble with the doubled leading tone like that, and having that D as low as it is. That D, remember, this is tenor is sounding an octave lower than written, so that D is only just above the bass note, and the spacing of this is, yeah, it's a little low. And then I have that D, A flat, A, the tritone between the A flat and the D I get to hear twice. So probably that wasn't such a hot idea. If I took this thing all the way down to an F that filled out a triad, that might make it a little better. But now I have to ask myself, is my alto really going to be happy with an F? Plenty will, some won't. Yeah. Anyhow, you have to keep making these decisions. So at some point, you work your way back and say, hey, you know what? I was better off with what I had here, and you don't worry about it. So that's what chorale writing is about. And when I hear this, everything seemed like it worked to me. And really, the only thing that caught my eye as it was playing, or caught my ear as it was playing, as something that was like, oh, I wonder if this could have been done differently. And then I also saw, oh, he did a good job, is this measure, right? So he has an E flat chord, the one chord, and now he's adding the seventh to it. So it can be a secondary dominant resolving to A flat, E flat 7 resolving to A flat, the 5 of 4 resolving to 4. And the thing is, he's given me that seventh in both the tenor and the bass. And the tenor one is at the end of the measure, and it resolves the way sevenths normally do, down to the third here. The bass one, though, he gives that to me, and then he doesn't ever take that one down to C. Instead, he just goes back up to E flat and then jumps down to A flat. So my first thought was, oh, you should have taken that D flat down to C. Should have. That's the expected thing. But if he had done that, then he would have had two sevenths both going down by step. It would have been bad doubling, bad parallelism. So this was actually a good thing by introducing that seventh, but then also getting off of it and then letting it resolve down to the root and letting a different voice take the seventh and resolve it. I thought he solved that really nicely. The question is, did he need the seventh there? Well, no, not need, but all the other voices are sitting here on um uh sitting here on long notes, and he felt like something should move. It felt like it was a good thing not to move on beat two. Let me undo all those changes now, because I thought what Ben had is much better than what I tried to change it to. Something has changed on every beat. So some voice has moved on every beat. Everywhere the melody had half notes, he let some other voice move. That is good practice. But then when you reach the end of a phrase and you want it to feel like an end of a phrase, you let the voices come together and you don't add the passing tone, or neighbor tone, or whatever. You don't add motion. But what I would note here is that it's three beats of that. He didn't want to just sit still for three beats, so he let one voice move by giving it a seventh and then coming back to the root. He could have done that had he wanted with the alto, right? So that totally would have worked also. But that was the point. He wanted to let a voice move, and giving it the seventh felt like a good thing. And then, but that voice ended up not being the right voice to keep the seventh, because he wanted to get down to this A flat in root position. So he knew if the bass had the D flat, if it wanted to resolve to a C, then he couldn't have had that A flat in root position. So he let that A D flat sound and then change, and then let a different voice take the D flat. This is I'm reading a lot into what Ben has done here, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. I think Ben knows what he's doing and is thinking through things very similarly to what I'm saying here. And again, I'm going to check with Ben and see if my analysis even resembles at all what his thinking was. So anyhow, it's really well done. He concludes that phrase by resolving to C minor, starts the next section again on C minor, but then finally resolves the whole thing back to E flat major. And that's really typical. A chorale might end the first phrase in the relative minor, or end it on basically the 5 chord in a way that feels like, hey, maybe he's modulated to the key of 5. Maybe it's just a 5 chord. I'm not sure which. Those are both common things to do. So anyhow, hey, Wolfram. So I've gotten to talk about a couple pieces here that have allowed me to just enjoy music and get my head out of the space I was in before, and show you a number of things. That the idea of the model composition here, of taking a piece that you enjoy, doing some analysis, and trying to write your own thing in that style, that's a good challenge that I'll put forth for people. So if you guys are looking for a particular thing to work on this week, why not do that? Why not take some piece that you like, do a little bit of analysis of what it is you like about it, and then write your own piece that uses that. And it can be a really specific model like this, where he like kept this pattern here, the way that right? The way that everything about this measure here is very similar to the first measure of the E minor um, prelude here, with the running 16th notes in the left hand, the long note melody, the short stab chords on beats on beat 1 and 3. So he's copied so much about this, but then he changed that running 16th note pattern to be more similar to the C minor one. This is really copying a lot, quite exactly, from the original. You don't have to do that if you don't want. You can be a looser adaptation, but it's a really interesting it's an interesting exercise to do that. So anyhow, it's a good challenge for yourself to do. So is counter subject like fugue? So uh, counter subject is a term that we use talking about fugues. I'm going to talk about fugues going forward. I guarantee it. Might not be for a few weeks because I mentioned I'm teaching a counterpoint course, and we're going to get to fugue writing, like in a month or so, and so that'll be all over my thinking then. I will say the term counter subject, as it's used in a fugue, has a fairly specific meaning of a melody that is used that shows up at the same time as the subject and then comes back. Other times, when because the subject in a fugue is like the main melody that we expect to keep coming back. Some fugues don't have any counter subject. They don't have any uh melody that we ever hear over and over again other than the main subject. Some, though, have a counter subject, which is like the some melody that gets heard at the same time as the main subject, and then they get heard in that pair multiple times throughout the fugue. So that's the technical definition of a counter subject as it applies to a fugue. Does it apply to choral writing? That I don't have an answer for you. I know that term from fugue writing. Let's look it up and talk about what else that might mean in choral writing if we're not talking about fugues, and that'll be something to think about. So feel free to look up some stuff about that. Ask me more detail about that, and we'll get into that next time. So, all right, I think I have to get back to other things that I was previously doing, but boy, did I need this break. So, thanks so much, everyone, for being with me here and following along. And all right, well, see you, Rod. And then these are all recorded, so you can always come back and check them at any time. Just go to my YouTube channel and check my history. That I have a playlist there, the Music Masterclass playlist, and if I have things set up properly, all the episodes get added there. So you can always find me there. So hope everyone is having a good day and has a good week. And I will see you all next time. Oh, I just figured out that I can do this. I'm going to do this because I can. I can now end the stream from my phone. I can also start it from the phone, but I don't trust that it's going to work. So I'm going to end the stream from my phone so you don't have to look at me flip back to the stream screen. So I could just be looking at music while we end it. Goodbye.